Today on Turds Tech Tips, I'm going to show you how to do a leak down test on this CR250 right here. This one's a 98, but this process is the same for pretty much every iteration of this bike. The sizes of things might be a little different, but the general principle is the same. For those of you that don't know the general purpose of a leak down test or the principle of it, in effect, we are pressurizing the crankcase, which on two strokes it includes the cylinder, just like it would when it would be running. And we do this to find any number of things. It could be a coolant leak, like a head gasket. It could be a base gasket, an air leak, an oil leak, and all of these things will affect the performance of your bike. And also, it could cause premature failure as well too if you have a bad enough leak of any one of those things. Leak down test is very crucial in finding these things. It's really easy to do. The components are very easy to get and build yourself, and this combined with the compression test is a great way of kind of figuring out if you're new to a bike or even just doing regular maintenance to determine the health of the engine. To get set up for this, I've removed the subframe just to get the carb out, take your exhaust off, and my tester, I put the air through the intake side and plug the exhaust. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it this way. There's multiple ways of doing it. You could even put the air supply through the spark plug, but the intake side needs to be plugged somehow, and so does the exhaust. So I leave the spark plug in just as is, take the carb out. I have this 90-degree PVC pipe, I think it's 1.5 inches diameter, with a bit of electrical tape wrapped around just to make a slightly girthier pipe there, and I just use the regular cable clamp, or sorry, the carb boot clamp, tighten it down, and this is the side that I put my air through. And on the exhaust, we need to plug it, obviously, because we want a nice tight air seal. So this is an expandable freeze plug. You can get these in different sizes at most hardware stores, but this one is 1 3/4 inches. So you stuff that in there, wind the nut in, and the rubber expands to make a tight seal. Then you need an air supply. You can use a bicycle hand pump, but I'm lazy, so I use my air compressor here. And then here's my handheld test set right here. So I've got a pressure gauge reading low pressure because 5 psi is all we need for this. You don't want to go over 5 psi because you risk blowing seals. So 5 psi is all we need. So low count gauge so you can read that clearly. And I just have one ball valve right here. That's all there is to it. On a manifold, that's it. So if you're using an air compressor like myself, you will need to have a regulator of some sort, either on the air compressor itself like I do, or in line with the gauge to dial it down. So right here, all I'm doing is verifying that my gauge itself isn't leaking. I'm trapping around 10 psi in there. It doesn't really matter. Closing the ball valve, disconnecting the air supply, and leave it sit for a few minutes and make sure it doesn't drop at all. Then get some sort of timing device out, and the magic number we're after is it can't lose 1 psi over a 5-minute period. So slowly introduce the air up to around 5 psi, and then I close the ball valve, start the timer. You can even unplug the shop air supply to it at this point to make sure nothing else is getting through. But as you can see, we have a pretty good leak here. I've already lost a psi at about a minute's time, so there's no point continuing on. We need to find it. Okay, with this thing still running, as you can see, I got the ball valve just open a little bit to try and maintain around 5 psi. We're gonna go around the engine and try and find the leak. One of the first places to look for leaks is this guy right here. If you start seeing bubbles come out of there, that means you have either a head gasket, or it could even be a little bit of a base gasket, cylinder base gasket leaking, but more often than not it's the head gasket that will leak and cause bubbles through here. Next, I'm going to go around spraying all the surfaces with a bit of dish soap and water, looking for bubbles just like you would on a car tire if you had a flat. So cylinder base gasket, power valve gasket is a likely area, cylinder head gasket, even the spark plug crush washer, sometimes they can leak. This side of the reed block, so these are looking for air leaks here, and want to hit this side of our tester too to make sure our tester is not leaking. And then you just sit and wait and look for bubbles. Another thing that's not sealed on these Hondas is this power valve a roller stop bolt right here. There's no O-ring, no nothing on that, so that could also leak, so pile some water around it. Can't see anything obvious on this side, so I'm going to come around to the exhaust plug. We need to verify that our plug isn't leaking either. So we spray around it. Exhaust plug looked good, so I'm coming to this side. Same thing. Head gasket, reed block, our tester. You want to spray the elbow as well too, maybe the elbow's leaking. Cylinder base. And even around this has an O-ring on it on the other side of this power valve cap. And let's watch. I see one right here. My tester's leaking a little bit. So this is what you got to look out for. This is what it looks like when you do find a leak. So I got to fix that. But the rest looks pretty good. And oftentimes with the bubbles you can even hear it too. Once it gets to this stage, you can hear it. So I fixed the elbow. I put more Teflon tape on the threads and cranked it on there. So that stopped that leak, but I'm still losing about a PSI in a minute. So I'm right at the limit. Next step, since I can't see any external leaks, would be the crank seals themselves. The right one is what I will check first. You can either do that by listening to the crankcase vent, which is on this CR, it's right here. You could spray some soap in here, and if you hold it up right, if this guy starts to bubble and you pinch the tube a little bit, see that? So there's obviously air coming through there somewhere. That's one way of doing it. Another way would be to just take the oil cap off itself. And if you have your 5 PSI locked in there right now, when you take this cap off, then if it were leaking bad enough, it would drop right down. And you can oftentimes hear it leaking out of there too. Now, to make sure that that's my only leak, what I can do is put the oil cap back on, screw it down tight, and you clamp the breather hose. I'm gonna try it now, and if it doesn't move and I'm holding 5 PSI, then I know that that's all my leak I'm seeing is somewhere on the right side in the lower end there. So that's one way of doing it. So clamping the breather hose slowed it down quite a bit. I ended up losing maybe about, I don't know, slightly less than half a PSI after a minute. So the majority of my leak is coming from either the crankshaft seal behind here, or what I think is happening on this bike is kind of inherent to the design of the exhaust valve, which I'll show you in a second once I pull the cylinder off. But first I'll tell you about the crank seals. If, say, your bike had quite a bit of time on it, you might want to be checking that right crank seal. And to do that, you'd have to pop the entire right case cover off and do what we did with the soap trick there. Or if your bike was burning lots of oil, like not just two-stroke oil we're talking here, like your bottom end, your crankcase oil, your transmission oil, if it's chooching lots of smoke more so than normal, that might be your culprit right there. So you don't only have to worry about the right hand crankcase seal, you have to worry about this one also, the left side. If this is leaking bad enough, this will absolutely ruin your engine, more so than the right. This will draw in stupid amounts of air through your seal in here and throw off the mixture of what your engine's burning. In order to verify that this is good, really the only way to make damn sure on this side as well is you need to take this off, dismount your flywheel, the stator, so you can physically see that crankcase seal, and spray it with soap and make sure it's not leaking. But it's something else to look out for. If you can't find any externals like I just did, then you start chasing these guys. So I've got the cylinder off the bike now, and I'm going to try and fix this leak where I suspect it's coming from. And on these pre-electronic exhaust valve CRs, this is a very prone area. And when you're doing a top end on these, you need to grease these power valve linkage rods with this special M77 grease. It needs to be molybdenum disulfide is kind of the compound. It's this black, dark gray color, thicker pasty grease, because if you can imagine, in here is subjected to the same pressures that's going on in your cylinder. So there's no airtight seal between the actual power valve gates and in here, and whatever is in your cylinder is going to try and bleed through down the hole that this rod fits into like this. And besides the rod itself and this bushing, as you can see, they're not exactly airtight, so this all needs to be lubed up to prevent bleed through of pressure coming down through here and then down into your right hand crankcase half and out either your crankcase vent tube or your oil cap if you had that removed. So after greasing the power valve linkage with the proper grease, like I was supposed to do the first time around, this thing is now airtight. I filled it up to about 4.5 psi half an hour ago, and that needle has not moved at all. So got away with one here. It's something to look out for on these mechanical linkage exhaust valves on these CRs. The newer models, I think is 02 or 03, they switched to the electronic, so you don't have the same issue as what happens here, but it's something to look out for. And yeah, hopefully you guys learned something, and until next time, cheers.